So it's a drizzly day on the 27th of January, and I wanted to show you the second, third and fourth magnolias to come out in the garden here at Caerhays. And the second one out is Magnolia campbellii alba Strybing White. This was planted only in 2003, and you can see the wonderful lichen which grows from its trunk, which is truly a sign of clean air up in the garden. And when we look at the buds lower down on this quite well developed tree, we can see that they're nowhere near open, and that each bud has still got its secondary outer casing on it, which protects it from the frost. So those buds, before they come out, they'll lose the outer casing and they'll lose the inner casing, then they'll come out. Or perhaps they won't, because this bud here by my finger has clearly been caught by the frost and rotted off. But although we can't really see today very much of this magnolia, because you need a blue sky to see a white magnolia, and especially a white magnolia that's got somewhat blown about and slightly frosted earlier this week, but you can just see the first white flowers hanging somewhat forlornly, looking a bit browned up and droopy. But if the sky was blue, it wouldn't be much to rush and come and see, but it is only January and exceptionally early for a magnolia to be in flower, even after a pretty mild winter. So this high up above me is the third magnolia to flower here this year, and again you're not exactly going to be rushing, and possibly you'd even wonder why I've bothered, but this is an old wild collected in China seedling which was planted here in the 1920s. It's a fairly pale form of Magnolia campbellii, and although you can't see it today, the flowers aren't pure white, they've just got a hint of pink. And you're seeing just the very first few flowers that have been blown open in the wind this week. And there's one bud lower down which is nearly open and just showing white. It's not unusual for this elderly tree to be one of the first magnolias into flower, but our largest and pinkest Magnolia campbellii is probably 2 or 3 weeks away flowering yet. This one's always a little bit earlier, but not nearly so impressive in flower. And I fear that you're not going to get very excited about this little video clip, but the next one is better. Well, I'd hoped this magnolia might be something a bit better to show you, but I'm afraid the frost has intervened a little bit. I'm standing in front of Magnolia Lanarth, or to give it its full title, Magnolia mollicumata subspecies Lanarth, or to give it its even fuller title, Magnolia campbellii subspecies mollicumata subspecies Lanarth. But I think we'll just stick with Lanarth. As many of you may know, Lanarth is a place down near St Kevin on the Lizard, and in the 1930s, the first half a dozen seedlings, or half a dozen seed rather, came back from China from Forrest's last expedition, and they were set growing at Lanarth, and they're very small trees. They don't make big trees, and they're quite sparse flowerers. In China they were collected in an area where there aren't any other magnolias, which is why nobody's quite sure whether this is actually a subspecies in its own right, or whether it's actually just a form of campbellii. The reason people got so excited about Magnolia Lanarth is that it is the most gorgeous purple colour in a cup-shaped flower. And I'm afraid, against the very grey sky, you can see very little of that, particularly after they've been frosted. But there are several different plants of Magnolia Lanarth in the garden here. For the last few years, this one has been far and away the first to flower. and I'm not really quite sure why, because it's tucked away in amongst these rhododendrons for a bit of shelter, and it's only started later in life flowering well. One of our other plants of Lanarth took over 50 years to flower for the first time, but this year it's certainly going to deliver. But actually, when you look at the buds, it's probably 3 weeks away. Normally you'd expect Lanarth to be flowering mid to late February, and sometimes even later. Down on the lizard, I've seen it in flower in late January, and I suspect it is in flower there today, but I wouldn't have expected to see this here. It's really quite exciting, or it would be if it hadn't been frosted a bit in the 2 days it's taken to find a decent enough day to actually film it. So, having rather disappointed you with the second, third and fourth magnolia out here, I thought we might just pop back to the first magnolia which we looked at about 10 days ago. It hasn't enjoyed the frost or the wind, but for some reason the flowers are largely unaffected, and we've actually got a flower fully open, although a bit bashed around. We've got a nice lot of buds showing some really dark purple colours, and I wouldn't say that the plant has rushed on in the 10 days since we last looked at it, when there were only really 3 flowers showing colour. But anyway, it hasn't got ruined by the frost, and there'll still be a pretty good show here, I reckon, in a month's time. And in a month's time, if we don't get any cold weather, we'll start to get into the magnolia season properly, but at least it gives us something pleasurable to think about while we're stuck yet again and yet forever in lockdown.